Today I'll be continuing the reading of Chapter 10 in Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology. We are working on Section 3 on the Great Diffusion, on the section on the northeastward diffusion, and the second part of that. 2. The High Neolithic. The most important archaeological site in the whole of the Far East is at Anyang, in the northeastern corner of Honan, where the Swedish geologist J.G. Anderson, the same to whom we owe the find of Chaokautian, discovered 3 superimposed strata of pottery representing the earliest levels of the Chinese High Neolithic and Hieratic city-state as follows. The painted pottery of the Yangshao culture level, circa 2200 to 1900 BC. The black pottery of the Lungshan culture level, circa 1900 to 1523 BC. And the white pottery and bronze sacrificial vessels of the Shang culture level, 1523 to 1027 BC. Pigs, cattle, and dogs were the domestic beasts of the Yangshao complex, with a considerable emphasis on the pigs, and the chief crop was a millet or primitive wheat. Among the other elements carried from the southeast European Danube-Dniester zone were a number of distinctive painted pottery motifs, for example, the double axe, spiral and swastika, meander and polygonal designs, concentric circle and checker patterns, wavy water lines, angular zigzags, and organizations of bands. Spear and arrowheads of slate, a way of building pile dwellings along river and lake shores, arrowheads and awls of bone, as well as a particular technique for cutting stone and a kind of square-cut axe made by this technique, which, in the further course of its migration, was to appear throughout the Malay Peninsula, Indonesia, and a good part of Melanesia, as well as in a modified form throughout Polynesia. The headhunt, too, was a component of this barbarous Bronze Age culture of the steppes and followed the square-cut axe into Indochina and Oceania, though apparently not to the northern sphere of Yangshao. For a second parallel phase of the same stream of life that brought the Yangshao complex to Kansu, Shenxi, Shanxi, and Honan, not reaching, however, as far as to Shantung, turned south into the Malay Peninsula. This branch, writes Heingeldern, before coming to further India, must have passed through western China. It must have been a folk and culture wave of prodigious force, he then goes on to say, which arrived in East Asia from the west in the late Neolithic, transformed its entire ethnic and cultural structure, laid the foundations of Chinese culture and the Chinese Empire, as well as of the further Indian and Indonesian cultures, and finally went on even to Madagascar, New Zealand, East Polynesia, and in all probability America as well. Relatively small groups are enough to give an impulse that will continue to work for millenniums and across continents and across seas. It is, in short, to the impact of this Yangshao Austronesian culture wave that a great part of the broad diffusion to which I have devoted part 2 of this study must now be attributed. The headhunt, the pig, pile dwellings, megaliths, and their associated rites of animal sacrifice came together on this wave from the west. In the Southeast Asian zone, a secondary Neolithic complex involving rice culture and the water buffalo was encountered and absorbed, and on the great riverways of the Irrawaddy, Salween, Minam, Mekong, etc., a characteristic boat, the outrigger canoe, was developed, which then bore the assemblage not only westward to Madagascar, but also far eastward to Easter Island, and no doubt beyond. The basic rites of the cannibals of Ceram and the panpipes, as well as of Brazil and of the Solomon Islands, were almost certainly transported by this culture wave. for it achieved in Indonesia an impressive adaptation to the highways of the sea. The island of Java in particular abounds in examples of the characteristic square-cut acts of this brilliant day in many significant modulations, including a number of perfectly magnificent ceremonial forms which Hein has described as marking the high point of the Indonesian Neolithic stonecraft. A considerable culture peak was achieved. The population of the area was relatively dense. Trade was vigorously plied, and the impress of this specific center can be readily discerned from Madagascar to Easter Island and from New Zealand to Japan. Furthermore, if we may judge of the date of this important prehistoric culture movement from the carefully checked evidences of the Chinese Yangshao stratum, circa 2200 to 1900 BC, its period of florescence must have been early in the second millennium BC, in plenty of time for the delivery to the coast of Peru of those telling calabashes of Huaca Prieta. And to mark a still further point of coincidence, we may recall that the formidable culture center in the Black Sea area from which this broadly influential Far Eastern complex came was sending its spreading rings westward into Europe as well as eastward to Honan. We have already noted that circa 2500 to 1500 BC, its impulse reached both the Baltic and the Balkans. V. Gordon Childe has remarked that when pig bones are found among the remains of the ancient dwelling places of eastern Sweden, they belong to a cultural horizon contemporary with the middle, that is high, Neolithic, and illustrate the start of a secondary or even tertiary Neolithic culture. The first steps in swine breeding by autochthonous hunter-fishers. May we then think of the panpipe of Arcadian Greece as an inkling of the same great diffusion as that represented by the panpipes of Melanesia and Brazil, on the opposite rim of the spreading ring of waves. Is it not our only sign? It is not our only sign of such diffusion, by any means. For indeed, have we not already had Persephone and Hanuele to teach us? Or shall we say that all these correspondences of archaeology and mythology now adequately identified in the farthest flung branches of our science, which so neatly gear even as to date and would readily clarify an otherwise inscrutable enigma, must be overlooked as simply accidents of chance? The purely psychological reading of these parallels will not do at all, since a clearly, even though sparsely documented historical sequence has to be recognized with its perfect coincidence of dates. The Kurgan, Baro, or Tumuli people entering Europe circa 2500 to 1500 BC. The Yangshao culture stratum of China circa 2200 to 1900 BC. A parallel cultural development in Java with a mastery of the seaways, and then at Huaca Prieta, those grinning calabashes, circa 1016 plus or minus 300 BC, to mark the smuggling of an alien agriculturist across the Pacific into the New World. But what, then, was the meaning of this ritual of the sacrificial pig, lamb, goat, or bull, which, having come into form as a basic feature of the High Neolithic, was diffused one way or another throughout the world? On the Melanesian island of Melakula in the New Hebrides, halfway between Fiji and the Solomon Islands, an extremely complicated system of men's rites involving the sacrifice of many sacred pigs is celebrated among megalithic shrines that closely resemble those of prehistoric Ireland. John Layard, in his richly illustrated Stone Men of Melakula, has given evidence enough to establish such an association, and, as Hein has sufficiently shown, there was indeed a late diffusion in several waves of a megalithic culture complex into this part of the world, where the great stones are associated with the ceremonious pledging of a covenant, the offering of a sacrificial beast, originally a bull, states Hein Geldern, but in peripheral areas, the pig, memorials to the honored dead, and to capture the heads of the headhunt. According to Layard, the Melaculans attribute their own megalithic tradition of the pig sacrifice to a mythical family of 5 culture bringers, who were brothers and white men with aquiline noses. Their chief, the creator and giver of all good things, is represented constantly, Layard declares, as sailing in a canoe, and in almost all, if not in all, areas where he is known, he is represented as having finally sailed away over the horizon to an unknown destination. In his heavenly aspect, he is invariably associated with light, and in one way or another with the sun and moon. But he is also said to have been buried sitting on a stone seat within a stone chamber covered by a mound of earth and loose stones. In other words, as Layard points out, what we in Europe would call a chambered round barrow. And his body and that of his wife are said to be incorruptible. The alleged undecayed bodies of this culture bringer and his wife are ritually washed at certain festival times for the purpose of ensuring the continuance of the human race. This highly interesting, theoretically challenging megalithic complex of Melakula is brought to focus in a context of ceremonials known as the Maki, which lasts from 15 to 30 years, and when finished is immediately recommenced. It serves, on the one hand, the aims of the community, inasmuch as it magically fosters the fertility of the race, but on the other hand, the personal fame and ambition of the individual, since it is a rite of a strongly competitive kind, in which the men of the village, breeding up and sacrificing numberless boars, vie for status both in this world and in the next. We have been introduced already to one of the chief elements of the mythology of the Maki. When the Malakulan dies, we have noted, and commences his journey to the land of the dead, the female guardian of the cavernous entrance to the other world draws a labyrinth on the ground across his way, and as he approaches erases half. To pass, he must know how to reconstruct the labyrinth. And he must also offer a pig for the guardian to eat in lieu of himself. But this can be no simple ordinary pig. It is to be a boar bred up by his own hands and ritually consecrated time and again in the ceremonials of the Maki, at every stage of the development of its greatly cherished tusks. And hundreds of other boars must have been sacrificed in the course of these ceremonials, so that the beast offered represents the whole life effort, as well as the ritual status of the voyager. At the beginning of its days, the upper canine teeth of a male pig are removed ceremonially, so that the lower, meeting no resistance, may continue to grow. These lower tusks then curve outward, down, and around in such a way as to circle back, penetrate the lower jaw, and form a ring. Such growth requires at least 7 years, and every stage represents an increment in spiritual and therefore economic worth. But one circle is not the highest stage of achievement. 2 are not uncommon, and with great good fortune even 3 can be attained. The pain to the animal is so great, meanwhile, that it puts on little flesh, and from the standpoint of a gourmet would be a miserable morsel. But in the realm of the spirit, we are not to think as gourmets. These radiant pigs are not physical food, they are spiritual food. They represent the moon, that glowing orb with which the sea-voyaging ancestral white man, the founder of the cult, is himself identified. For as Layard explains their power, the really fundamental concept of the tusks is not that they should form a spiral, but simply that they should be curved or crescent-shaped, thus representing on one symbolic level the waxing and waning moon, both represented together on either side of the mouth of the same sacrificial animal. The black body of the boar between them corresponds to the new or black invisible moon at the time of her apparent death. The boars, then, are the moon at the moment of its death, consumed by the goddess guardian of the underworld. Their tusks point to the continuance of life, however waxing and waning over the ground of death. Thus, in their own way, they symbolize the mystery that we have already discussed in connection with the planting world mythology of the serpent and the maiden. The boar sacrifice, symbolically, is equivalent to the sacrifice of the maiden. But the boar is a male. Furthermore, it is a figure derived from the domain of masculine interest, the animal world, the world of the hunt, the world of domesticated flocks. Sows are neither sacrificed nor eaten. Their flesh is taboo, even despised. And the staple food of this society is the yam, cultivated by the women, to which breadfruit, shellfish, and fish, turtle eggs, prawns, eels, flying fox, and other bits of wild game may be added. So that, from the physical point of view, all is well enough cared for by the women, the circumstance being precisely that described by Father Schmidt in his characterization of the natural supremacy of the female among primitive planters. However, with the pig, the maki, and the rites of the men's lodge, a masculine mythological spiritual counterforce is brought to bear against the feminine power. The chief divinity concerned is female, indeed the guardian of the gate, who eats. But she is cheated, overcome by the rites. She consumes the boar, but the man escapes. She consumes the black boar, but the radiant tusks survive and are hung as signs of man's immortality from the roof beams of the cult houses. Women, furthermore, being without souls, are not deeply concerned in this spiritual game. They acquire rank along with their husbands as the men, through sacrifice, proceed up the mystical ladder of their Masonic lodges. But the cult itself is a man's affair, and through it the role and importance of woman have been systematically reduced, so that she cannot even figure now as the sacrifice. It is the boar, not the sow, that is killed, and when a human offering is to be made, it is no longer a maiden, but a man or boy. In the first phase of a maki ceremony, the focal center is a dolmen, a kind of table stone, formed of a great slab supported by stone uprights symbolizing three things: a stone grave, the cave through which the dead must pass on their journey to the other world, and the womb through which the living may achieve rebirth. A wooden figure is erected before this symbolic structure to represent all the male ancestors who have gone through this rite in the past, and to serve also as the gable post of a roof thatched over the dolmen. The main beam of this roof terminates in a carved image of the mythological hawk, whose spirit hovers over the ceremonies. And since no portion of the cult structure is ever removed, the ground all about is strewn with the rotting remains of earlier times. The crucial rite before the dolmen occurs when a man seeking to elevate himself in the power scale ceremonially approaches, in imitation of the soul approaching the cavern's entrance to the other world. His mother's brothers block the way, just as the female guardian spirit will block his way at the time of death. And he then makes copious offerings to them of boars, and these go to his credit in the spiritual account that will be closed only when he dies and is buried together with his supreme pig. The values of the offerings are reckoned by the tusks, and according to these values a man's rank is made. Without tuskers he can neither enter the land of the dead nor be reborn, cannot even marry. Moreover, since in the course of a ceremonial as many as 500 pigs may be offered in a day, it is clear that any man who takes seriously the salvation of his eternal soul must be considerably occupied with the spiritual exercise of breeding, trading, and reckoning his pigs, which indeed serve as money in Melekula. So firmly fixed and well known are their relative values, just as in the higher cultures gold, which is of no more practical value than a Melanesian pig, supplies the basic standard of all monetary worth because of its mythological reference to the sun. Gold is of incorruptible character, untarnished by the touch of time. The kingly crown of gold, symbolizing the secular power as well as spiritual authority of the character on whom it sits, corresponds to the boar's tusk decorations of a cloud-catching Melanesian. And just as a man with a golden crown or even a golden cigarette case may regard himself as having gained the fruit of his birth, so likewise the Melanesian Maki man, with a fine display of the skulls of 1, 2, and 3 circle tuskers along the roof beam of his family home. The natives declare that their boar offerings have taken the place of human sacrifices. Yet, to this day, a personage of great purpose, seeking the paramount crown, may offer a young human being, along with a fine 3-circle tusker, and thus perform a feat of as great value as can be expected of an aspirant, either in heaven or on earth. The human victim of such an offering is generally a bastard, bred and reared solely for sacrifice, kept healthy and given the greatest affection, while being kept ignorant of the fate in store. The boy and the very precious 3-circle tusker, painted exactly alike, are led together to the dolmen, when suddenly those dancing behind the boy seize him, and slipping over his blue-painted neck a rope dangling from the hawk's image, jerk it so that he is left hanging, whereon the sacrificer, lifting his club, sacrifices him by striking him on the head. The victim is then lowered, and the 3-circle tusker he led in is clubbed also, and left on the victim's body to die. The boy's body is given to the makers of the ancestral image to eat, and the man who has made the sacrifice assumes the title of Maltanas, Lord of the Underworld. He communicates with the unearthly, we are told. He may do as he wishes. He may even do what is not done. No man dare be hated by him. And after the killing, the new lord of the underworld remains for 30 days on the stone platform, eating only yams. His limbs are covered with armlets of the most valuable shell beads, and he has pig's tusks as bangles, from elbow to wrist. He is a very picture of that immortal person for whom death has no sting. And with this, I believe, we have our final clue to the ritual sacrifice of the royal terms of as well as to the fury for sacrifice that beset at one time or another every part of the archaic world in the various high periods of its numerous cultures. A magical power is gained according to the measure of one's sacrifice. The ultimate sacrifice is, of course, oneself, yet the value even of this self is to be measured according to the orders of sacrifice accomplished during life, and made by one's survivors at one's mortuary feast. The most potent supporting offering of this sort is another human being, one's son, one's slave, one's prisoner of war. But the next in order is some beast that one has raised oneself and cared for as one's own. Moreover, wherever such animal offerings are rendered, the beast is of a species mythologically associated with deity. We have mentioned the Capsian petroglyphs in North Africa, showing a ram with the sun between its horns, and the figure of the moon bull on the sacred harps of as well as the bull's heads on the high Neolithic pottery of the Halaf style. Let us add now the rites of the Minotaur in the bull rings of Crete, whence the imagery was carried with the megalithic culture complex to Spain. where even today we may see the brave moon bull with its crescent horns slain by the solar blade of the sparkling matador, just as the Paleolithic bulls in the deep temple caves of the neighboring Cantabrian hills and Pyrenees are slain by the solar power of the shamans. And in Malekula, on the other end of the line, the same symbolism is rendered in the megalithic rites of the sacrifice of the lunar boar. The offered beast is a captured quantum of divine power, which through its sacrifice is integrated with the giver. The giver climbs, so to say, on the rungs of his sacrifice, and the maki is a great ladder of such rungs. When the aspirant has accomplished his ultimate sacrifice, he is identified with the hovering hawk, the mythological bird that is carved on the roof beam over the dolmen, and the old man presiding at the right who has invested him with the power name of the boar that has just been killed, which now is the name of his own new life, springs into the air and with extended arms and fluttering hands in imitation of the hawk. At other times, it is the sacrificer himself who, mounted on his stone platform at the supreme moment of sacrifice, spreads out his own arms in imitation of a soaring hawk and sings a song about the stars. The word Nambal, hawk, may be used as a personal name by the man who has achieved such rank. Other lofty names are the face of the sun, catches clouds, at heaven's zenith, holy ground on top, and Lord of the above. Moreover, this yearning upward, which, as we have seen, was characteristic also of the shamanism of the north, is rendered here in the symbolism of the great dolmens and monoliths themselves. Some of the platforms that play a part in the second phase of the maki being of such a height that they overtop the trees. In this second phase, the structure on which the offering is made is a high platform of stone raised behind the dolmen, on the summit of which the culminating boar offering takes place, the kindling of the new fire and the assumption of the new name. The mythological reference of this tower and its sacrificial fire is to a large volcano on the neighboring island of Ambrim, which is supposed to be the happy land of the living dead. Abiding that fire is bliss. There is no fear of being consumed. A number of variant images are given of the voyage of the dead to their happy land. According to one, the soul entering the cave is immediately blocked by the guardian spirit, Le Hev, to whom the boar offering is presented to be consumed in lieu of the soul itself, and the voyager then, allowed to pass, goes through the cave and emerges on the coast, along which he walks to a certain rocky place, well known, where he lights a fire to summon the ferryman. The latter comes in a ghost canoe, which is called banana peel, and might be any little bit of bark from the banana tree, floating on the water. The waiting soul, then, is ferried to the great volcano, which is called the Source of Fire, and there the ghosts dance every night and sleep all day. But according to a second version, the fire of the volcano is spread over the whole path, and the boar is placed in the grave to appease this fire. The guardian, they say, stands upright in the midst of the path of fire, then rushes forward to consume us, but is content to eat the boar. We are far, indeed, in these myths and rites from that profound feminine experience of immolation and transformation which the noble Abyssinian woman, earlier quoted from Frobenius, expressed when she remarked on the utter triviality of the male's mode of experience and understanding. His life and body are always the same. He knows nothing. They represent, in fact, a masculine transformation of the planter's myth of the immolated maiden, through a force derived from the northern shamanistic sphere. The mythogenetic zone of this high Neolithic mythology of acquisitive sacrifice was the Black Sea area. First, the southward shore of Anatolia, and the Taurus Mountains, where the figure of the bull in association with the naked goddess first appears about 4500 BC, on the painted pottery of the Halaf style, and then, with an even stronger stress on the values and anxieties of the male ego, in the barbaric steppe lands of the lower Danube, Dniester, and Don valleys, from which, as we have just seen, the wielders of the square-cut axe broke away in the 3rd millennium BC to reshape the world.